Can you hear me?
I can, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, excellent.
We
Finally.
got there
Sorry,
in the
I'm a
end.
bit of a Luddite, I'm afraid. So,
Well, I'm on with Peter Barnes. Peter C. Barnes. Thank
I
you.
know, yeah. Hello. How you doing? You okay?
I'm all
Happy
right.
birthday, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. God, my feeling it this morning. A few too many rums last night, if I'm honest.
I tell you
Um,
now, I'm 34. I feel about 72 today. It's not even funny. I've had a chronic back pain for about 2 weeks now, and I feel like I'm just like lying like a plank board. It's ridiculous, actually.
well,
So
I've
if I
got
keep
enough grace for
fidgeting, it's
both of
because
us, I
I've actually
think.
got to keep stretching.
So, the format of my interview, podcast, whatever you want to call it, is pretty simple.
Yeah.
Uh, I usually have questions. I haven't got any, so I'm hoping the conversation just
All
flows.
right.
Um, so tell us a bit about yourself, Peter, and your career and where it's led you to and how you got to where you are. I think I accused
Oh,
you of living the dream. So
yes, you did. Yeah, I always find it funny when people say that because I never wanted to do any of this. It was never really the big long-term plan. I wanted to be a history teacher for a very, very long time. My aunts and uncles are teachers. My sister was a teacher for a little bit, and yeah, it's just always something I always rather liked because I particularly history. I think most people who have an interest in politics tend to have an interest in history as a kind of like their
mhm.
way into it, unless they come from a political family. But I suppose for me, I was really around the time of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and it was the war and the buildup of all of that. And my family watched the news pretty much religiously, like 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock. It was like it's basically what we did. And then from that, I suppose it was just a fascination with it. The kind of the pomposity, the
Yeah,
pageantry, the ridiculousness of it all, and then I found myself to be a conservative rather again by accident than anything else because I come from Wigan near Manchester, which is a very, very Labour area. I mean, the old joke is you could put a pig in a Labour sash in Wigan and it will win the general election. It's one of those kind of places. And, I was somewhat of the odd one out, I won't lie, but I've been pretty much that most of my life. But yeah, and then I went to university, did politics, I did masters, and then I ended up for a little bit working in pubs and bars and things. I nearly ended up being a landlord of a pub. I've never really had a kind of set career path. This is what I've always wanted to do. I'm one of
yeah.
those people that I change my mind pretty often, which is annoying to most people, but I kind of feel that that's their problem than anything else. But yeah, and then I ended up coming to London about 10 years ago. I started working for a couple of members of parliament. I worked in parliament. I did a stint at number 10. I've worked for the EU. I've worked for NATO. I've been pretty much everywhere, really. And I think that's given me a sense of kind of a bigger perspective in politics rather than just being the political one. I've done it from the administrative side. I've done it from the kind of implementation of policy as well as the formulation of policy as well, which has given me a greater sense of contempt for everything rather than anything else. Because obviously, when you kind of peek behind the curtain, it's obviously the Wizard of Oz isn't as great as it's supposed to be, but here in the UK, it's even worse than you can imagine. The standards of just behavior are appalling. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a workplace at the end of the day, like everywhere else. So everyone's got its dramas
Yeah,
and
of
the rest
course.
of it. But these are just, it's like somebody saw a fire and they just threw petrol on it and then put it in an aeroplane and it just blew up. It is
Right.
ridiculous. Every single day, there is something that really could have been cut off and headed off really early on. But because nobody ever wants to make a decision in this country anymore, or
Mm,
just anything really, it just grows and grows and grows. And that's how you get scandals. Realistically, that's how everything ends up on the front page of the Daily Mail eventually. How I've not ended up on there just yet is a miracle I can only imagine. But
there's still time, I would
yeah, that's
imagine.
kind of how. Oh, yeah, plenty time, plenty time. By the end of the day, I have no doubt that there'll be a headline or something because I kind of fell into the media stuff again, rather by accident, which again annoys a lot of people because they really want to do this, and I'm kind of like, well, I just turned up. But a friend of mine, his name's Mayar Tusi, and some people may have heard of him. He's a big
Yeah, yeah.
political YouTuber. He started his channel what about 5, 6 years ago, and me and him were really, really close friends at the time. And I ended up hopping on board really early on as his kind of political editor, saying, "Don't say this, do say that," kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
interview that person, get involved in that thing, and just kind of give it a bit of direction. And then I started doing. one of his kind of like live stream podcast things. And then his partner at the time was actually a producer at GB News. And we were in the pub the night before. It was all the Owen Patterson scandal. Do you know? It was about the lobbying rules, basically.
Yeah.
And we were talking about it, and as you know, as clearly you do at a pub, that's what politicos do. We talk about politics. Unfortunately, we're that entertaining, and which and she just asked me like, how does an MP like get punished? Like, what's the procedure? So I just said, well, it's this committee, it's that. I thought nothing of it. The next morning, it must have been about 6:30 in the morning, and she's ringing me, and I'm like, she never rings me. So I was like, somebody's either dead or something really important has happened. That's generally how it works. And she said, "What am I doing?" Well, I said it was 6:30. You've just woke me up, and I've got to work in a bit. And she was like, "Well, would you mind just coming on GB News just to talk about the disciplinary procedure? They needed somebody just to explain the nuts and bolts of the kind of procedures and how it all works and everything." And I was like, well, I've never done it before. I've taught people how to give interviews. I've been the guy behind the camera plenty of times, but never been in front of it. And she was like, no, it's fine. They know it's your first time. There's no trick questions, nothing like that. And she said I would be on with two other people. I was like, oh, perfect, little panel, pressure's off. I got there. The two other people had bailed out of it, so it was just me on my own for 12 minutes answering all these questions. And if you asked me about it or what I said, absolutely no idea. It flies by. And I remember walking, the one thing I do remember is walking off the set into the gallery bit where all the producers are. And they were like, was that your first time doing it? I was like, yeah. And then in my head, I was like, oh my God, I made an idiot of myself. My biggest fear is coming true, that I'm going to be a meme and not a particularly good one. And yeah, and they said, "Oh, can we keep your number? We want to invite you back on. If there's a segment or something." I said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't think anything of it. And 3 years later, here I am. I've got my own content. I'm on Talk TV, GB News, Times Radio. I'm pretty much all over the place or everywhere. So that's kind of how it all happened. I kind of fell into it. It was never the plan, never anything I particularly wanted to do. Not like this was the full-on vision. But yeah, I have to admit, I'm rather enjoying it. It is chaotic, but it's good fun at the same time. I won't lie. That is true, and I've met some amazing people along the way. That's even truer.
Who's the most famous person you've met, or most infamous?
I met most of them. I met most of the royal family. I met Trump. I've met.
I don't think you can top
quite
those.
A few actually. I don't. I have to admit, when people say, like, who's the most famous people, you go like, I met the Queen and I met Donald Trump. It's kind of like, don't try to compete because you're not going to win.
No, you're not going to beat that, are you?
Yeah.
Goodness me.
I have to admit, I was at a party one time and somebody said that to me and they were like, Peter, don't answer. Because I don't think they knew what I did for a living and all the rest of it. And I think they would think we were going to go in with some celebrity that I'd probably never heard of. Because whilst I know a lot about, say, political stuff, culture and popular, not a clue. Absolutely no idea. I was at a friend of mine was having a birthday party for their daughter, and the singer Jess Glynn was there.
I don't know that.
She does the music for the Jet 2 advert. She if you've seen the Jet 2 advert, she sings that song.
Right,
Darling, hold my that one.
That one.
Yeah, that had just come out. And I had no idea who this woman is, and I did the classic Queen comment. And what do you do? And like everybody around me was like, "Are you an idiot?" But apparently, she found it very endearing. So there's always that. But honestly, I'm useless when it comes to any of that kind of stuff. Like, there's a great episode of is it a Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister, where Sir Humphrey's following around the Prime Minister, going, "Oh, that's this person, that's that person." I would be appalling at that job. Absolutely appalling. I know names, I know faces, but very rarely put them together.
Right. Okay. That's fair enough. So many people have answered the question, what's the Queen like? So I'm not going to answer that. What's Trump like?
Very tall and very nice.
Is he,
yeah, just a genuinely nice guy.
An intimidating air about him because he's big and because he's like larger than life?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. But when you meet people who are powerful and like they're that powerful, they don't have to tell you they're powerful. You can just feel it. You get that sense of I can't talk to this person. With Trump and most actual big powerful politicians I've ever worked with or met, most of them have actually been very, very nice because I think they're aware of the impact that they have in a room.
Yeah,
So
I
the
get you.
minute they walk in, everybody suddenly turns to look at them. And you can tell the really good ones because they try to talk to you. They don't wait for you to talk to them. So that it's that kind of personal interaction. So some of the worst politicians you find are the ones who expect you to start the conversation. The best ones are the ones who start the conversation because it shows that they're aware of like who they are in a way,
Mm,
not like in a kind of don't you know who I am? Because that kind of person never survives in politics. But particularly in the UK scene, if you are kind of have a modicum of self-awareness, you will go so far. It is absolutely ridiculous because it's in such short supply. I always say it should be studied for medical science. The lack of self-awareness we have in this, for some people have, but yeah, I would say like when you meet people like that, it is obviously it's very intimidating, and you're very kind of like just like as stiff as a blow, as stiff as a board, and you don't want to embarrass yourself. But I think they make you feel so relaxed. So the Queen was very, very famous for having that kind of relaxing element to her. But I suppose when you've
very
been when you were
stoic,
the
wasn't
Queen for
she?
that long, and probably you're very stoic, but also you hear this from stories, very funny. Like
Mm.
she had a sense of humor and she was aware of the kind of, like I said, the aura that she gives off and that kind of, that she used to do this thing where she used to shake people's hands but give their hand back because people used to talk to her whilst continuing to shake her hand. So she had this thing every now and then where she used to physically give you your hand back because people wouldn't let go, which I always thought was hilarious. But actually, having been there and seen it happen, it happens all the time, and I suppose it does get quite annoying. But again, I think it's that skill of being aware of the aura you give off, for the power that you have, and being respectful of that as well.
Hmm.
One thing I don't like about a lot of politicians now is the kind of they get into the position and then they suddenly think that's it, and I'm like, no, no, no. Like there is so much more that goes into like representing people and always being on, as we call it, always
Hmm.
being aware that you're not just a person, you're representing an office, the country, a region, a group of people, and how you behave and is a reflection on how they behave. And I think a lot of politicians forget that now, that you are a representative of your area and the people that you have put you there to do a job. You've got to be respectful of that, even if you don't like the people. That's
Yeah,
that's what you're there to do. But I know some people say I often have a wishful thinking problem, but I just call it having standards. I don't know about anybody else.
there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. So you said
Mm.
earlier that you're conservative. Are you still on that side of the
Mm.
fence?
Yes, I am. Yeah. I often get asked this: am I joining the reform bandwagon?
I
The
was
answer to
going to
that would
go
be a
on to that.
categorical no. Yeah, everybody always asks this question, and I've somewhat become known as the reform basher. In other words,
Reform
I'm known as one of their biggest critics, and that's because I come at them with their own hypocrisy. I don't like hypocrites. I don't like people who say one thing then do another. I don't like
Okay.
people who flip flop on policies. I don't like people who have a private and a public opinion. That was Hillary
Mm,
Clinton's favorite downfall line. Well, not one of many. And I think Nigel Farage falls into that category because I've worked with Nigel. I worked with him on the Brexit referendum. I've known him. I've had drinks with him. He's a very personally nice guy. My problem is I'm after somebody who can transform the country in a very difficult position. I don't see that with a single person involved realistically in reform right now. I'm not saying never, but right now, I don't see it because you're making all the right noises on one hand. And then when it comes to actually putting the policy together, what you want to do, you're either falling short or you're contradicting yourself or you haven't got your numbers right. That's the big one. Getting
hmm.
your financial numbers right is a really important thing for me. And yeah, I just don't see it. So when I start criticizing reform, it's not because I don't like them. It's actually because I want them to be better. And I always think that if they sit on
Okay.
the right of politics, which where I sit very comfortably, but I think friends should call out friends. It's easy to have a go at the Labour Party for me. It's not difficult. I don't agree with their politics. I don't agree with what they want to do. I do agree with what reform want to do. So for me, it's about lifting them up to make sure that they're better, so that even if they do get into power, they're still going to do something that I want them to do, and it's going to be better than what they've got planned at the minute. It's about raising the standards. That's everything I always do. Every criticism I have of them, or even of the Conservatives, which I have 1,000 of. It's all about making sure that my side wins, and when we win, we actually deliver on something because I'm sick to death of voting for Conservatives or conservative-minded people and not getting it. And I
No.
feel like I'm going to have that problem with reform. I genuinely do. I'm looking at a party that wants to balloon the welfare state, that they want to nationalize everything within an inch of its life. I'm looking at them a dodgy position on Shamima Begum. They're all over the place. And they're only winning because everybody else is losing. And I think if the issues were different, let's say like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, reform wouldn't even be a thing. It wouldn't even be on the radar. They'd be where UKIP are now, for example. It's because they're taking advantage of the situation. They're reacting and not leading. And that is
Hmm.
a huge problem they have. And people keep confusing noise for leadership. You can make all the noise you like, but you're not leading the issue, you're reacting to it.
That being said, your party, the Conservatives, were there for 14
Mhm.
years and
Yeah.
nothing got done that we can see.
Yep.
I think
And
one of my
as I
previous
always say,
interviewees said they just sat on their hands.
yes, they did. They really did. They well, particularly under Boris, they got given what 80-seat majority. Did absolutely nothing with it. It is utterly unforgivable. They could have rolled back most of the Blair reforms in the early years. They really could have transformed and deregulated and done what was necessary, and they didn't. And they should be punished for that. And I said that very publicly in the general election, saying they don't deserve to win. I wanted them to win because I didn't want Kistama. Because as I said ad infinitum, he is going to be a terror. And everyone was like, "No, but Rishi." I was like, "No, no, no." But is not an argument in favor of something.
No, no.
How the other guy reacts shouldn't affect how you vote. And I really hate what they call it, negative voting, and I don't like it. I've tried not to do it, but it is difficult. But for me, the Conservatives for those last 14 years are the canary in the coal mine. They're the warning that if you compromise on principle, if you start trying to chase votes, if you start doing all the bad bits in politics, that is what happens to you. And people are using them as an excuse and not a cautionary tale. That's my big problem right now. People keep saying that like you rightly said that they didn't do anything and all the rest of it.
Hmm.
That's not a reason now for other parties to sit on their hands and say, yeah, well, the last 14 years, which is what we're starting to see from reform and from the Labour Party as well. They keep going back from the previous government, our inheritance from the previous. That doesn't matter. It's about what you do now. And the reform in particular really have to stop doing but the Tories line, because
Mm.
it's starting to wear off on the Labour Party and it's starting to wear off now. We're over a year into a new government. People are starting to wanting to see some change, some new ideas, some freshness, particularly now more than ever. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing it from anybody. Don't get me wrong, the Tories, they deserve to be quiet for a little while, but they need to get back in the game. I think this time, it's been a year, you're taking your medicine, sat in the corner on the naughty step for a bit, but it's about time that they stepped up and got back in. Robert Jenrick, he keeps bobbing up and down. He's somewhat of what I call the Pepsi to the Coca-Cola of Nigel Farage. He's when people say, "Oh, well, we've got Pepsi, will that be okay?" That's what Robert Jenrick is for me. But again, he's being effective in some way, I suppose. But yeah, it's a tricky one for the Conservatives this time. But for me, they've just got to survive like in 2001. That's what the next general election will be like for them. It's just about staying in the room.
Okay. So I'm not asking you to name drop on this next question,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
because that wouldn't make any sense for the question. But if
Hmm.
if there was a perfect Conservative government for you, what would it look like?
Yeah.
What policies would we have for the UK?
Oh,
That's a bit loaded. I appreciate that.
yeah. I guess it's a little early in the morning as well. I would say everything that's got to be business related, because we have become a hostile environment to business.
Hmm.
We've got to make it easier to be a business focused nation. Now, I'm not saying we become Singapore on the Thames, which is what Jeremy Hunt wanted, and it's been floated around for some idea that we become this kind of low tax and all the rest of it, because that's not in our political culture. What I'm saying is, if you go all the way, I think I'm going to sound pompous now, but if you go all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon once called this nation a nation of shopkeepers, and he meant it as a derogatory way. In other words, we were just small little people. I actually think we need to go back to the nation of shopkeepers. That actually, we could use it as a moniker of people building their own businesses, of being self-employed, of starting their own, being entrepreneurs. We don't have entrepreneurs in this country. We don't have people willing to take risk. We've become so risk averse. It is absolutely ridiculous. Obviously we have things like COVID, and our reliance on the welfare state and the nanny state is out of control. But I would look for any kind of conservative government that actually has competitive tax policy, that looks at VAT reform, that looks at business rates reform, that looks at, making it easier to employ people, making it easier to have a second job, making it easier to have a side gig. If you look at young people now, they're the most entrepreneurial ones out of any generation. That's why a lot of them are tending to switch to reform, not because of social politics, but because of economic politics now.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite interesting, the dynamic shift between my generation, which is the millennial, to Gen Z, and how the weighting of what they vote on is slightly different. But that's what I would look at. I would look at it being a very kind of pro-business, but not at the sake, not for the sake of or sorry, at the expense of people, because we are a very caring nation. Don't forget the NHS and all the foundations of the welfare state that we have here. We can never kind of just shrug that off. But what I would say is we need to start to become a little bit more self-reliant as well. We always look to the government to fix everything, and the track record of governments for as long as I've been alive has been making things worse, not making things better. You look at Ronald Reagan's famous quote. He said the most dangerous 11 words was, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I always think that is one to live by. And I find it interesting as well that HS2, for example, is studied in Chinese universities on how not to run a public service operation. It's actually studied in universities on how not to do something. And yet we consistently believe that the government or the state is capable of doing things for us. And I don't understand that cognitive dissonance. I'll never get it. It's like when people say, "Oh, we need to nationalize the railways." I'm like, have you seen how they run everything else? Well, you expect them to run the railways better? It has always made me laugh, that element of, I think politicians are all in it for themselves and all that kind of stuff. But please run every aspect of my life for me, because I somehow seem incapable of doing it myself. And I think that's also a big factor, just becoming a little bit more self-reliant, a little bit more assertive, more willing to take a risk, and pushing a more entrepreneurial spirit within the nation, because we will not get out of this rut by relying on the government or relying on the state. We need a full cultural reset. And I don't think it's going to be very comfortable for a lot of people when we really start to say that you don't get a free car because you've got anxiety.
No.
I don't think that should be a radical thing to say. I don't think it's a thing that I should even have to say. I think that's how radical of a position that it is.
I think you say radical, but there's a lot of people I've spoken to who won't come on camera and private conversations. Not that they've got public and private opinions, but their opinions are like that this shouldn't be happening anyway. But
this actually strikes into a really big problem that we have in this country.
Radical.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, my favorite one is controversial. There's no such thing as a controversial opinion. There's just one you don't like. That's always my way to look at it. But it's interesting you say this about people not willing to say things. If they're an elected official, I understand why they won't, because you won't get your job again. This country has become greedy. It has become rather self-indulged, and it has become a hand-out, not hands-up society. Blair was bang on that speech when he gave it. I think it was in 2004, 5, and about how we don't vote for people that say we can't afford this. We don't vote for the cutback. We vote for more and more and more. We've ballooned the state because of our own greed, not because of people ripping it off. We have no money because we're having continually spending it on things that we shouldn't have to spend money on. So the welfare bill is a prime example. The Labour Party wanted to cut 5 billion. That was a drop in the ocean compared to what we needed to cut. In reality, for us to even be able to keep the lights on, but I think by 2030, it's expected to be close to nearly 80 billion pounds. This is a lot of money, and it's going on things like free cars and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, people framed it as we're trying to take benefits of people. We're not. We're trying to make sure that the money goes to people that deserve it and need it, not frittering it away on, oh, I just feel a bit sad. There was a case of a 21-year-old kid who was signed off work permanently, so he never has to work again after a telephone interview. One telephone interview, and he was permanently signed off. How is that a thing? In what world, in what civilized Western nation can you expect that to be a thing? Because you
So that
can't
was a
run
medical,
a
sorry, that was a
functioning
medical
society.
assessment over the
Yeah,
phone.
yeah, a medical assessment over the phone, one phone call, and he was signed off work permanently. And so
That's a
never has to
lifetime of
work a day in
benefit.
his life. Yes, yeah. And, it's just that is the culture. So when I say we need a cultural reset, that is the type of thing that I'm talking about. It's not taking things away from people who desperately need the help. It's making sure the help goes to the right places. And too many governments have been either scared to make this argument because they will lose elections, or they've just not put the argument well across. If you know what I mean, they've just
Yeah,
not
yeah.
argued it very well. And you know, it's rather ridiculous, actually. I saw this interview with a guy called Ali Milani, and he's a left-wing commentator. He was on LBC, so shock there. And he was making this case that somehow, because all the millionaires were leaving, and we've got to have the kind of what they call capital flight. So all the money that basically they get taxed on pays for basically the country. And because they're leaving, our taxes are going to have to go up. So you say, oh, we're being held hostage by millionaires. And I was watching this interview and I was like, no, we're being held hostage by your greed, by your need for the state to consistently provide and provide and provide. So, yeah, the people that are actually paying for it are going to get a little bit annoyed when they see that their money, like even people watching this, our tax money is going on this stuff. That is what we're being held hostage to. We're being held hostage by a culture that will not take tough decisions because we are so infantilized, so self-indulgent that it is harming us to a degree that it is really difficult to put into words unless you see the physical numbers of what we're actually dishing out on a daily basis. It makes the migrant crisis look like child's play. It really does. In comparison, we fuss over the migrant crisis, and don't get me wrong, it is a huge issue, but we have so many structural ones, so many existential ones that realistically, on a scale of the top 10, the migrant crisis doesn't even come in the top 50. It is absolutely ridiculous what we've got wrong in this country. And it is all because we have been weak, and we have been over-reliant on the state, and we have become rather spoon-fed, and we're quite happy to keep taking the spoon.
Okay. So speaking of the migrant crisis, because it does seem to be a hot topic, and it's definitely in the political arena.
Yeah.
It seems to be
Tell me
a bit
about
of a football. Well, I've interviewed protest organisers for migrant hotels in my local area
Yeah.
in Norwich. I've spoken to a couple of protesters as well. They've been happy to come on camera. So,
Yeah.
do you think that these people coming across the channel are economic migrants or genuine asylum seekers, or is there a blend there from the Conservative viewpoint?
Okay, so it's a blend. It's a blend. It's a
Yeah.
blend. Anybody who's saying that everybody's here is just kind of they're here for the money, they're lying. Anybody who here because they're fleeing everyone's fleeing violence, they're lying. It is as per usual. We have to do this thing that we don't do in this country. It's called a nuanced position. It's actually looking at the detail and looking at the numbers and actually coming up with a position.
But France isn't at war.
But what I will yes, exactly. However, so this is part of the problem is the kind of the structures, the legal structures around the asylum system on an international level were put in place after the Second World War. We're looking at treaties that are 50, 60, 70 years old. It is ridiculous that they are still being applied to modern day. How anybody can argue that we don't need legal reform on this stuff, again, it's dishonest. They're just being dishonest with you. But the real reason we have the migrant crisis is because of trade. We have had organizations like the European Union and the Customs Union in particular that have stopped nations developing. So we've kept what used to be called LADC, so less economically developed nations, in stasis. So places in Africa, places in the Caribbean, places where they produce food. So we've kept them as an agricultural nation. So they've
Right.
not had the great jobs. They've not had accountants. They've not had the middle class development that every other nation, particularly in the West, has had. So they're looking
Okay.
around the world. They're suddenly seeing, well, wait a minute. They seem to be living a much better life over there. I'm going to go over there. So because we have for so long kept these nations from developing for, again, greed mainly, and our own kind of getting nice cheap stuff rather than having to pay a little bit more for it, which is essentially what the customs union is. It's a trading group, so everything else outside of it is more expensive. That has meant that people are leaving the nations where there aren't any jobs to come to nations where there are jobs. Now, we in the UK have this ridiculous system of rolling out the red carpet and giving people whatever they want. That is an absurd position that we've taken. But we cannot in any way say that we aren't also responsible for people coming here, because we played a very active role in the organizations that have kept these nations down and have forced people to leave. You then add political instability, you add military instability. Let's not forget things like blowing up a country forces people to leave. You know, call me a radical, but I don't want to live in a country where something could blow up at any moment. You don't, I don't. I imagine most people watching this don't. So why are we so we never seem to grasp the idea that neither does anybody else. But yes, we seem to have this idea that we roll out the red carpet and anybody can come, and they have been coming en masse. And the world has been, at first, I don't think it realized the scale of the problem they were going to introduce. And then Angela Merkel, who has blood on her hands, who has decimated Europe, she will go down as one of the biggest villains in history, as far as I'm concerned, has opened the floodgates in 2014. That was when everything changed. You know, the numbers went from a few thousand to hundreds of thousands. I think altogether now we're at 87 million migrants moved into Europe from 2014 onwards. That is an insane amount of people. And countries like the UK, whose infrastructure was already pretty weak, has been overflowed. And it's not necessarily the amount of people, it has been the way that they have all arrived in such large numbers all at once. It is the way that the system has been overwhelmed, not necessarily the sheer amount of people. So I always make this argument: the number of people is concerning, but it's only concerning now because our infrastructure is even more crumbling. At the beginning, it was the fact that people were coming in large numbers and all at once. But the migrant crisis is again being used as a political football. You're right in that case, and it is exhausting to keep listening to people argue stuff. And I'm like, one, you don't understand the thing you've just referenced, and two, there is another side to it that you know exists and you're choosing to ignore it. I don't get me wrong, I'll throw the mud around. I don't mind getting in the dirt and throwing some stuff at the Labour Party. They can throw it back. I'm not bothered. But we're now at the point where some of these issues are real serious issues. So we look at the impact of the migrant crisis on things like crime, for example. Sexual assaults and rape have gone through the roof, and they have been proven to be linked to the migrant crisis. You can't deny this now. You're looking at, there's loads of examples. The
rise in anti-Semitism as well.
And rise in anti-Semitism is a fine example. But also, if you look at the ones, say, where Bournemouth, at the Bournemouth Hotel, £1.3 billion is about to be lost along the south coast in tourism, because people aren't going to the places that are now deemed to be not safe. So it has effect on businesses. It's got the ripple effect now. It's not just, overwhelmed because you can't get a GP appointment. It's affecting everything. And because we've let it linger so long, it's become infected into our kind of system. And too many people won't admit that. They still have this whole, they're fleeing. We need to help them. We do help them if they are genuine. But we don't roll out the red carpet, because we don't do it for the people that are suffering here. And that narrative of charity starts at home has never been more prevalent. I mean, you had the whole Ryland Clark incident on breakfast television just the other day.
There's a lot of people saying he's going to get sacked for that.
I expect he will suddenly disappear from ITV very quickly. Because I don't think he's really come out and apologized for it, which he definitely can't do. But, it is interesting, again, that he said that kind of thing that you hear everybody else saying, and the people are saying he's going to get sacked. That culture is toxic beyond belief. And it is one of the reasons that this country is in the mess that it is in, because you can't voice what I think is a pretty reasonable opinion without fear of losing your job.
Right. Well, I think that's a great place to end as well, Peter. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for your
Yeah.
time. I really
Thank you very
appreciate
much for
it.
having me. This is fun.
So
You're very
we're filming
welcome.
this on
Thanks.
the 29th of August, and
Yeah.
you're on Talk TV later, are you?
Yes, I am. You'll find me 7 o'clock every Friday with either Kevin or whoever's filling in, or sometimes they even let me host now. So
There
that's
you
how
go. Look.
dangerous it's got.
Right. Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.